So the topic of week 3 of the AMEC International Certificate in Measurement and Evaluation course is research and statistics. That's likely to send some people into fits of panic. There is no reason for that, of course. In fact, research and statistics are our best friends when it comes to uncovering insights and generating value for clients. I have somebody with me who has been using research, data, and statistics for a long time in a number of roles. He's written books about it. He's running his own data-driven storytelling consultancy, Inside Agents. Welcome, Sam Knowles.
Good to see you, Thomas. Good to be here.
Good to see you again. Now, I'm not sure I should say this, but I will, you're a 30-year-odd veteran of the persuasion and influence business with a classic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been kicking around for a fair old while.
A fair old while. Started off with a classics degree, and then you did a doctorate in behavioral psychology. We've known each other for about 10 years now. We met at the AMEC Summit in Lisbon in 2011. I suppose we were both waiting for the Lisbon Memorandum to follow the Barcelona principles.
I think it was called the Lisbon Legacy at the time, I think.
The Lisbon Legacy. Talking of legacy, in 2013-14, we were colleagues at W2O Group on a mission impossible to build a global social intelligence solution for Procter & Gamble from scratch in a few months. I still have the occasional nightmare involving our Ukrainian client contact, but that's a different story. I mentioned you run your own business, Inside Agents, and you've published 2 books about data, insights, and storytelling, Narrative by Numbers in 2018, and How to Be Insightful, which came out last year. And then, of course, you're involved in a fabulous podcast about data, big and small, and its impact in business, politics, and society, the Small Data Forum, that you and I have been running with Neville Hobson for about 5 years now.
Indeed.
So that's the brief introduction out of the way. Everybody knows now who they're faced with. Let's get straight into it.
Okay.
The whole pandemic story, that trickle of information about the extent, the contagiousness, the spread, the impact, constantly changing pieces of information requiring adjustment of positions, flexible decision making. It's a perfect case study in data storytelling, but it seems mainly a case in how not to do things. So my first question to you, in this week's webinar, I'm showing a brief clip of Sir David Spiegelhalter, the UK's most prominent statistician, venting his frustration in a BBC interview with Andrew Marr. It's from May last year. Mm-hmm. And Spiegelhalter complains about the UK government press briefings as number theatre. I know you hold Spiegelhalter in really high regard and you share his frustration. So what's bugging Dr. Knowles when it comes to politicians, public figures' grasp and use of data during the COVID crisis?
So, I mean, I think actually it's got better, and it's got better partly because people like Spiegelhalter. I mean, Spiegelhalter sits on Sage, so you know he's not a bit part player, or he sits at least on one of the main Sage committees. So I think that things have got better, and they've got better for a number of reasons, but they have been bad. They were particularly bad when Messrs. Cummings and Kane were in charge of the numbers theatre. Spiegelhalter, some of the people may not know, it's not maybe particularly well known, is one of the people responsible for establishing the BBC Radio 4 programme. And well, listen, I only know it as a podcast these days. Who knows when any programme goes out, right? More or Less, presented by Tim Harford. Spiegelhalter and a collaborator of his, Michael Blastland, created More or Less back in, particularly Blastland in the lead, back in the mid-2000s, 2005, 6, I think. Spiegelhalter and Blastland wrote a really good book not long after called The Book of Norm, or The Norm Chronicles. And The Norm Chronicles was about an average person living an average life and what happens to them during the course of their life. And although they're very different, I think there's something of the spirit of the of More or Less in the Small Data Forum that you and I, Neville, are involved in, looking at stories behind the news. Now, I think that it's difficult, isn't it, to talk about people having had good pandemics or otherwise when, what are we now, 123,000 deaths in the UK, 2.5 million worldwide. But I think it is fair to say that more or less, and Harvard's team have had a really good pandemic because they've looked at the data consistently and they've looked to try and make sense of the data, not on a day-by-day basis. I think the media have signally failed. And I think that's one of the frustrations of Spiegelhalter in your clip, consistently Spiegelhalter, and also more or less. The people are looking at day by day by day by day. They're trying to understand at a, it's gone up, it's gone down, what does it mean, when actually some of the basic science wasn't understood. But I think that the action, more or less started for its Xth, 13th, 15th, 28th, I don't know, whatever series it was, just before, I think the week before lockdown, and then ran 18 weeks. It had an extended run before having a well-earned break. I think the unifactorial, the single factor, this and only this has caused that, is one of the reasons why there has been so much frustration about the way that data has been used during the pandemic. I think I mentioned Spiegelhalter and Harvard and others having been a counterweight to that, a counterbalance to that. And I think they have been, and I think that it's been important. But I do think that the departure of Messrs. Cummings and Kane is important, because I think one of the worst examples, long after the example that Spiegelhalter gets cross about in your video, one of the worst examples was the Halloween press conference, what I called in a blog the Nightmare on Downing Street, where clearly Cummings' sticky fingers were all over not good data, very bad news, but we're going to persuade people to do things for political reasons, and we're not going to be led by the science, even though we may have said we're going to be led by the science. And there was a really, really horrific mangled chart that was trying to justify the second lockdown. I think we would probably all agree, new variants notwithstanding, actually it wasn't really a lockdown. Think of the shops that were open, think of the things that you could still do. It wasn't a lockdown. It was generally go out and spend money and have a good time and hope that things don't happen. There's one chart in particular, the so-called SPY-M chart, that was used by Johnson, Vallance and Whitty to try and justify the lockdown, to attempt to justify the lockdown. And there's a great guy, another guy who I think comes up smelling of roses over the last year or so, as we record, a guy called Dave Henson, who is also known as the slide presentation guy. He's the author of an excellent book called Your Slides Suck. Now, he's much more than a brilliant PowerPoint man, but Dave took the SPY-M chart, which was the second wave chart that was showing hospital admissions and what was likely to happen, and made sense of it. He's not a statistician, but he's a really good data visualizer and data presenter. Made sense of it and then recast it in a completely different way, in a way that says that doesn't patronize the audience, but a way that explains the data. But also, really importantly, it says this is what the data means. This is what we should do as a result. And by the way, if you want to know more, I can tell you where all my numbers come from. So I think that is so I think that the political expediency and the martinet-like control, for God knows what reason, that Cummings had. Well, I suppose Cummings got Johnson elected to prime minister. I suppose that's why Johnson was so grateful until other forces managed to get rid of him. That's why he was so grateful. He allowed him to, do the Barnard Castle nonsense and get away with that. I mean, sorry, I'm not cross about that, because it's history, and so far he lost. But so I think that was a particularly egregious example when Cummings and Kane were hastily cobbling together slides for a Saturday evening press conference to stop people going out for Halloween parties. And I don't mean that I think that was the wrong decision. I think it was a decision that was far too late, and they'd allowed it to get too late. Another really bad example I think, and I think that Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance and Jonathan Van Tam have all, they've been the experts that Michael Gove said in the EU referendum, we'd had enough of them. I think that they've been generally good, but I think that Whitty was bad with the SPI-M chart, and I can give references to the before and afters for you to include in show notes for this recording. Another really bad one. Another really bad example was around the announcements for lockdown 3.0, which I think we all agree has probably been the worst lockdown. But 3.0, when there was new variant anxiety, and although I think it was Vallance in this case did explain what 30% more fatal meant, he did not explicitly call out the differences between relative and absolute risk. So what the Kentish, I think it's Kent rather than Essex now, the Kentish variant would be if 1,000 people aged 60 plus contracted new variant COVID, special new COVID, 13 out of 1,000 would die, compared with silly old bad boring original COVID, in which only 10 people would die. So that is a 30% increased relative risk, but that is not the way that it was reported, and that is not the way I believe that the government and indeed its scientific advisors wanted it to be reported. The way that it was reported was that it was 30% more likely to kill you. And what people interpret that to mean is they have a 1 in 3 greater chance of dying as a result of contracting this variant, which is not the case. So I think there have been some egregious examples, but I think that the counterweights of people like Spiegelhalter, who's very hair-shirted about it, he's got into all sorts of tangles. Tim Harford actually interviewed him for the Royal Institution lectures before Christmas. You might say it's a bit of a love-in, the creator of More or Less interviewed by the presenter of More or Less. Maybe it was, but he interviewed him, and he's very hair-shirted about it. I think he's probably more hair-shirted than he needs to be. He blames himself more than he needs to. Oh, it was too easy to misinterpret. But I think the reason I bring up that 30% example is because Spiegelhalter is the past master of explaining the difference between relative and absolute risk. And he does it with bacon sandwiches. And in the links to the blogs, you will see exactly why he does it with bacon sandwiches. So there have been some bad things, but there have been some forces of good working against that.
Well, fingers crossed that data sense making will be one of the beneficiaries of this experience. But we'll see how this is going to pan out.
We'll see. So
I've mentioned you've written 2 books, Narrative by Numbers and How to Be Insightful. And they're all about data. They're all about using data to tell better, meaningful, purposeful stories, and also how to arrive at insights that help tell these better stories. So in the context of this week's topic, research and statistics, how important are good research and sound, reliable statistics for powerful, purposeful storytelling?
Pretty damned important, I would say, but that doesn't mean that everyone suddenly needs to become a statistics ninja. I mentioned Harford. Last year he published this book here, How to Make the World Add Up, and he but also we've mentioned him already. Here's Prof. Spieg. This is a heavier weight book. This is a much heavier weight statistical book, The Art of Statistics, but it's important. So both of them talk about data sniffing. So if I mean, Harford's got 10 rules for thinking differently about numbers, and sort of sniff the data. Does it smell okay? But particularly if it elicits an emotional reaction in you, you should pause, have a cup of tea, walk around the block, and come back to it, and then say, why does it generate an emotional reaction? So I think data literacy clearly is important. The ability to, but more than that, the ability to ask, the ability to develop a critical faculty. You know, critical thinking is, it's not a GCSE subject, but it is a topic that is taught in all secondary schools in the UK. But I don't think it's taught well enough. It's an optional subject, so it's not taken seriously by those maybe who teach it. It's not examined, and it's not taken seriously by those. I say this as the father of a late teenage boy who sat through some critical thinking lessons and thought that they were interesting, but you know, kind of largely unproductive because people were messing around in them. But I think development of a critical faculty and the ability to sniff data and ask questions. I mean, one of the, you know, I'm waving books at you, not my own books. You know, you're doing that, Thomas, you're doing that. One of the things that I think is bloody marvelous is this book, Calling Bullshit in the Age of Big Data. It's written by two West Coast American University of Washington and Seattle academics, Bergstrom and West. And it's based on a MOOC that they created and ran for all of their students in liberal arts and sciences as well. It's the book of the MOOC, and the MOOC is available. It's all on YouTube. There's 10 hours on YouTube, and it's well worth watching and doing because it gives you proper critical faculty and skepticism about data in an increasingly data-driven world. So I think that, you know, ideally we would all up our statistical abilities, but if you have the principles of the ability to sniff and call bullshit and understand that there's an emotional reaction, if you have that, if you know kind of where to start and the type of questions to ask, but particularly when you're looking to build stories, you've got some information, you've got some data about how effective a campaign's been or whatever it might be. And you start from a human, empathetic point of view about what the audience is or who the audience is that are going to receive the story that you're building, then you will not build a story that is, you know, 162 charts deep or is riddled with unreadable charts like the government's SPY-M Nightmare on Downing Street chart. You won't present charts that are unintelligible. You will be able to understand them at a single glance. And then, you know, I think this thing about empathy in presenting data and data storytelling is very important and much overlooked in all sorts of areas, but, you know, including in the measurement and evaluation of the effectiveness of campaigns. You want to trigger the reaction that is not people, as I saw the other day. I was on a call. I wasn't presenting, I hasten to add, but I could see reflected in the glasses of one of the delegates that they were playing. I think they were playing Sudoku or Yahtzee or something on their phones. So you don't want that reaction, you know. I mean, in the room, maybe it's slightly easier. You know, once we get back to rooms, it'll be slightly easier. But no, the reaction you want people to say, hang on, he said something interesting, or she said something interesting. I'm not sure I agree with that, or I'm not sure the data show, or I'm not sure or God, I'd always thought that, and they've got the data to show. So it's like I've never been fishing in my life. I ran past a fishing lake the other day in Sussex where there were, you know, I didn't think fishing had started. Anyway, I ran past the lake. They were fly fishing. They were casting lines on the water. And you want that kind of reaction, you know, you want your audience to be like fish. You say, oh, that's interesting, I must go and investigate. You don't want to bore them and browbeat them into submission with data point after factoid after spurious statistical analysis. Even if it's all valid, what you want to do is you want to get people saying, that's interesting, how did you work that out? Can you explain more?
I like that hang on moment. I think that's something I'm going to use, because I usually say to people, you know, you want to get clients to that point where they look up or they raise an eyebrow, and then, you know, all of a sudden you really have their attention, not just sort of coasting along. So
And
I'll call this a hang on moment. I think that's
you know,
good.
one of the things, Thomas, from our, I think we, you know, feels like we've worked together for years. I mean, we have worked together for years, but in the same company, drawing a salary. I don't think it was more than about 6 or 9 months.
No, but the experience was 10 years worth.
it aged us both 10 years. Quite right. Absolutely, the Blinova bonus. But I think that it's really difficult now. You know, I mean, you know, I know your background, and you know my background in different businesses that probably neither exist really anymore before that. But in the difficulty in quarterly or monthly or annual reporting is, how are we going to say something new? How are we going to, you know, we've looked at the status quo, and your brand health metrics, or your whatever performance indicators that we're using, your share of voice, your share of market, whatever it might be, hasn't really shifted. So how are we going to interest people? Well, I tell you what, I mean, for me, the experience is very often, let's show them all the charts we showed them last quarter or last month or last year, and let's put a big circle around where something's changed, or let's say nothing much has changed, maybe you should look at something else. So listen, I realize how difficult it is, but I think that, you know, brevity and clarity and simplicity, and really raising an alarm when there is something to be alarmed about, but not, you know, not hyping something for the sake of hyping it. It's really difficult. It is really difficult to get people to continually pay attention to something that they see every month, quarter, or year.
One thing I've learned in the last, among the many things I've learned in the last 15, 20 minutes, is that one significant difference between you and me is that your books are still made of paper by and large. My books are handcrafted by Jeff Bezos into ones and zeros, and they get delivered through Kindle, because I have those books, but just in electronic version. But since you mentioned your books, and you wouldn't wave them at us because you're way too humble,
I'm sorry, what was that, Thomas?
I will. I've got them here. Look, and in print. Right, you mentioned statistics ninjas, and that people don't have to become statistics ninjas.
Not everybody can.
And I mentioned that, you know, statistics scares a lot of people. Now, I know you told me once when you did your PhD, your psychology PhD, that you were teaching statistics during that time as well. And of course, the data is central in your workshops and consultancy work and so on. So how do you go about addressing people's stats phobia?
Really good. It's a great question. So listen, I left a very well-paid job on the, I thought it was the 1st of March, year 2000, to having sold a house in London, moved to Sussex, where it just so happened there was a brilliant master's course in stats. The PhD followed quickly afterwards. I then went around the world for 6 months. A lovely time. I came back and I walked in, and I was starting a new life, going back to school to do this 1-year master's. Didn't know that the doctorate was going to be a straight follow on then. And I'm full of, you know, I was really excited. I'd sat the first year exam papers in order to get into the course. And the thing that I hadn't realized, because I was dumb, was that, I had a 2-hour session on the Monday morning at 9 a.m. and it was called research methods. And I thought, oh, well, this will be interesting. I wonder what that's about. And it was statistics. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I've moved out of London. I'll never be able to afford to move back. I can't cancel this course. You know, I've chucked up a career. I've got, and I was just in absolute meltdown. And only for about 15 minutes, because my 2 teachers, one was a guy called Andy Field, who's written a brilliant book about stats for psychologists, and his examples are real world examples. Radio 1 playlists was one of his. His own research, his own psychological research, was in childhood phobias. So he used examples of the fictitious scary monsters that he quizzes 3, 4, 5-year-olds about. And suddenly I saw, hang on, so there's a row of numbers and there's a column of numbers, and you can put them into a hideous program called SPSS that nobody needs to use, and it will spit out answers to questions. And I mean, I literally in that first 2 hours, even though I didn't get anywhere near any kind of mastery for some time, because I was badly taught mathematics at school, and that's why I studied classics. I realized that they were beginning to unlock a new language. They were going to help me be able to speak a new language. And so I then massively overcompensated and really worked out how to do, pretty complex statistics, from multivariate analysis of variance to nonlinear regression. I mean, all right, I could say they're complicated statistics. One of my sisters, who's a mathematician, describes statistics as just, I think, correlation with a PR company, really. It's not difficult mathematics. It really isn't difficult mathematics. I'm not a mathematician, but I can do some stats. So I massively overcompensated, found this new language, and then kind of, as I carried on teaching, wanted to give something back. And the thing I loved with master's students and with doctoral people in their first, second, even third years of doctoral research, who really had the same visceral reaction as me. They thought they were doing psychology, not statistics. Oh, it really matters to have statistics. Was the look, I like lecturing them. I mean, not talking at them, but I like giving lectures because there would be a moment that it means that. But what I really loved doing, absolutely adored doing, was running practical workshops, usually on a Friday afternoon. So there was no high level of motivation. Often people will be crying at the beginning of the session. And it's not that I like punishing people, but they'd be crying because they couldn't get what they needed to do. Yeah. I would say, so, well, what's the question? What's the question that you want to answer? What's the, even they would be doing their own data, but at the beginning of in the first 2 terms, they'd be using data sets from really simple experiments. What's the question that we're looking to answer here? Well, it's should I take, given the risk of it, they're crying, wiping the tears away. Given I remember there was some data from some early Kahneman and Tversky judgment under uncertainty experiments we used to use. Should I take an umbrella given the probability that's going to rain is this? As I said, and they'd work, and they'd sort of, through their heaving chests and sobbing tears, they'd say, we want to work out whether we should take an umbrella. Right, okay. And you're able to find out whether you should take an umbrella on a given day in a given month if you put the data in here, this bit of data in here and this bit of data in here, and you analyze it in this way. And then their tears would stop. And it was the most rewarding form of teaching I have ever had. I didn't go into university teaching in order to be hugged by masters and doctoral students. I got no hugs from lecturing, a couple of hugs at the end of term from seminars, and about 3 a week from practical statistics classes. Sorry, Thomas, what was your question?
No chance for me getting any actual hugs soon. Not through Zoom teaching.
But just what was your question? Because I'm definitely giving you an answer to something here.
I think you've already given a good answer, because it was all about how to deal with stats phobia, and I think you've answered that very well.
What you need is calm. What you need is calmness and a realization that this is not terribly difficult, and potentially a guide to put a reassuring, if metaphorical in these COVID days, arm around your shoulder, just to say, what's the question that you're asking? Okay, if that's the question that you're asking, then this data can help you to explain the answer. The answer might be, in share of voice, brand reputation. I'm kind of using those as examples that the AMEC members and people may be thinking about. It may be that the answer is there is no difference, that nothing has changed. Brand health metrics, as we both know very well, Thomas, take a huge amount of time to change. Often, maybe less in a world that is digitally accelerating and is evolving more rapidly under pandemic conditions. But it may well be that nothing has changed, and if nothing has changed, don't try and find something that's changed just for the sake of it, because that's not hypothesis testing, that's hypothesis proving. and dear old Karl Popper and others would think that this was a bad thing to be doing, to be trying to prove. No, you've got an idea about what might change. You've looked at some data, but it may not have changed, and you need to. That's another, I think, a really important part of using statistics to tell stories. That you need to realize that sometimes things just haven't changed.
Yeah, my concern with a lot of stats applications these days is that you get told everywhere and by everybody in this industry that tech can do it all for you now, and algorithms can do it all for you now, and it's just there at the press of a button in that dashboard. And that's dangerous as well. So it doesn't really address people's stats phobia, but it gives them a sense that it's all there at the press of a button. You don't really have to understand it. You just share the numbers. And
no, Chris Anderson, when he was editor of Wired, wrote in 2008 a famous editorial that said, this was the end of theory, that the numbers speak for themselves. Then next year there was Google Flu Trends, and then that didn't work. Oh, maybe then, and then Signal and the Noise man Nate Silver, Mr. Foxy Nate Silver, at the beginning of Signal and Noise says quite pointedly, a finger in the eye of Chris Anderson, the numbers don't speak for themselves. We speak for them. We imbue them with meaning. However big the data sets are, they are not complete. They are definitely representative. And Spiegelhalter, in the book that I waved at you, could think of no better, he couldn't think of anything more important to say than to quote Silver and say, the numbers do not speak for themselves, Mr. Anderson. We speak for them, we imbue them with meaning. And that's a really important responsibility, I think, for anybody who is reporting data to others. Because, why are we reporting data to others? Well, it's partly to show that we've done our job. It's partly to say that we've measured this. But it's really to move people to action. We have a responsibility as those reporting data to others, because we might be looking to get a pay rise because we've run a great campaign. We might be looking to increase or maintain our retainer with our clients because the data show that the campaign has worked. So we imbue them with meaning, and remember that responsibility, because I'm completely with you. I will again call bullshit that you can do anything with numbers. I've not given you a Darrell Huff. I've not waved you a Darrell Huff because it's not on that shelf and I couldn't find it when I pulled the books off. But you can do lots and lots of things with data, and you need definitely to be responsible in what you do with data.
Bear with me a second. You wouldn't possibly be referring to this, Darrell Huff.
Indeed.
There we go. God, long histories of statistics pains. When you mention multivariate analysis and SPSS, 1994, 1995, SPSS 2.0.
Oh gosh, God, you got there. I didn't touch it until 2000.
So my memory of that is of creating some super complex query analysis that I only half understood at best, then pressing a button on the computer and coming back after 12 hours or 16 or something, and then with a bit of luck the query would have finished.
Well, by the time I got my hands on it, which was between 2000 and 2010, that was the time that I played with it most often. I got another license in 13, but I didn't use it very much. Because things have got more sophisticated, and particularly in marketing services, Tableau and other things. But the thing that used to make my doctoral and master's students cry, in part, was each statistical test, t-test, ANOVA, MANOVA, nonlinear regression. Each test was written by a different collective. It was like this collective of test writers, and sometimes you'd have to put the participant data into horizontal rows, and sometimes you'd have to put it into vertical columns. And if someone didn't explain that to you, you were understandably crying.
Now we are scaring people, so I need to bring this back. I know we're overrunning for
cup of tea.
How much time we wanted to spend.
Sure.
I have one more question for you, and I want to bring this back to how to be insightful, and also to one of the most overused expressions in in the history of consultancy, and that's insight.
Mm-hmm.
You have plenty of great examples of insights, how to arrive at them in the book.
Yep.
From the perspective of the people on the course, if you want, when you're working at what I would call the coal phase of PR measurement and evaluation, you have little time available, you have tight budget, pressing deadlines, lots of interference and distraction. How do you make space? How do you create opportunities for insights to emerge? Do you have a few tips for people?
Yeah, sure. So one, be permanently curious, not just for the thing that you're working on right now, but to be permanently curious and to absorb stuff from all sorts of places that helps you to tackle the brief that maybe needs an insight expressing in it. But permanent curiosity is invaluable. The second thing is time out. So the second thing is time out, is to take time out away from the insight problem that you're trying to crack. You need to allow your subconscious mind, and I don't think I'm controversial. I know there are those that think that there isn't such a thing as a subconscious. I think there very much is. To allow your subconscious mind to do its uniquely human recombinatorial thing of taking something old and something old, joining it together and making something new. The third is to be prepared and ready at all moments, including in the shower. And from under my desk, excuse the noise, I will draw my shower-proof crayons. I have no particular shares in those, but because I can. If people often say, when I was having a shower, when I was having a bath, important to be able to capture it early. When an insight occurs to you, you need to scribble something down. So post-it pads by the bed, ideas journals, whatever it might be. And then the fourth is to test it with colleagues and with clients early enough, such that they can feed into what you believe to be insight. But I think curiosity is absolutely vital and fundamental. And timeout is it sounds like a luxury, but actually working in consultancies, you have multiple clients. Generally, you have some really tedious things to do that can allow your mind to wander, your subconscious mind to get to work on the stimulus that your curiosity has put into it. The three things that I like doing more than anything else. I know I'm a strange guy. One is doing washing up pots and pans in a sink. The second is mowing the lawn, and the third is ironing. And that's because they are automatic processes that I really don't need to put much attention to. So that allows the subconscious to get away and to rumble things over. And then just occasionally from the subconscious, different suggestions of recombinations will be let through. Oh, that's interesting. Well, I wonder if that could work. Oh, no, it couldn't. No. Kangaroos, cucumbers, and helicopters, that's never going to work. Oh, but hang on. Platypuses, cucumbers, and kangaroos. Well, actually, that could work. I make up the variables that are coming through. But curiosity and timeout, I think, are absolutely fundamental. And timeout feels, one, to be too much of a luxury, and two, to be a bit of a palace revolution, particularly inside a consultancy business. But actually, consultancy businesses and also client-side roles, but consultancy businesses are fundamentally created such that you can take a sneaky bit of time out but still be doing some work. Might be your timesheets, might be your expenses. Probably not very difficult to do an expenses claim form these days. But there are other things that you can do, account management rather than working on the idea.
Fabulous. I think you may have unwittingly fixed some or suggested fixes for some relationship crises by nudging people to do more household chores. Excellent. So I'm doing a typical podcast ending thing now, podcast interview ending thing, by asking you, if people want to learn more about your work, where should they go? Where should they look?
Where should they look? They can look at, and these are all HTTPS's, insightagents.co.uk, narrativebynumbers.com, or howtobeinsightful.com. They can find me easily, and that's probably the biggest platform, even more than Twitter. I mean, Twitter at Insight Agents, Twitter at Narrative by Num, but LinkedIn, Sam Knowles Data Story is where you will find me on LinkedIn, and that tends to be the repository for all blogs and all commentary.
Very good. And I shall mention again the podcast that we're doing together, have been for almost 5 years, which is smalldataforum.com. And we always welcome new followers and listeners and so on. Sam, thank you very much for helping make statistics a little less scary.
My great pleasure, Thomas.
Cheers. Let me stop this now.